The weight of every word. Have you ever paused to truly consider the impact your words have on others and on yourself? Or perhaps you've been unknowingly manipulated through conversation without even realizing it. The way we communicate shapes our reality in profound ways. Think of all the avoidable arguments, the manipulated discussions, and the relationships damaged because of poorly chosen words. The ancient Stoics understood that communication is not merely an exchange of information, but a powerful tool that can either serve or sabotage us. According to Stoics, one should first understand what one wishes to communicate, and only then speak. This wisdom extends beyond simple clarity. It suggests that words carelessly chosen place us at a disadvantage in any interaction. In a world where everyone seems eager to speak, the Stoics recognize that silence often represents the true power. Our speech reveals our character, our intentions, and our level of self-mastery. When we fail to control our words, we surrender control of our interactions to others, particularly those with toxic or manipulative tendencies. By mastering Stoic communication principles, we reclaim our agency and prevent others from exploiting our verbal vulnerabilities. This exploration of Stoic communication wisdom isn't merely philosophical, it's intensely practical. Each principle comes with concrete practices you can implement immediately to transform how you engage with others, especially in challenging conversations with difficult people. 1. The power of silence. In our hyper-connected, constantly chattering world, silence has become uncomfortable. We feel compelled to fill every conversational gap, to respond immediately to every provocation, to voice every passing thought. This compulsion makes us vulnerable to manipulation and robs us of our power. The Stoic tradition teaches us that the wise person observes quietly while the fool speaks merely to fill the void. Silence isn't a passive state of helplessness, but rather an active tool of self-mastery and strategic thinking. Through deliberate silence, we gain critical advantages. First, silence provides us with valuable information. When we resist the urge to speak immediately, we observe more carefully what others are saying and what they're not saying. We notice contradictions, emotional undercurrents, and unspoken motives that would otherwise be missed in our haste to respond. Second, silence gives us time to process our emotions. Many regrettable statements emerge from unprocessed anger, fear, or hurt. By pausing before responding, we create space between stimulus and response, the very definition of emotional intelligence. Third, silence establishes presence and authority. Those who speak constantly often betray their insecurity and need for validation. The person comfortable with silence projects confidence and self-possession. Finally, silence prevents us from revealing too much. Manipulative individuals often provoke emotional reactions to gather information they can later use against us. Your silence denies them this opportunity. Practice. Implement the 5-second rule in conversations. Before responding to any statement that triggers an emotional reaction, count silently to 5. This brief pause allows you to respond thoughtfully rather than react impulsively. This principle doesn't advocate becoming uncommunicative or withdrawn. Rather, it encourages strategic silence, knowing when speaking serves no purpose or might even work against your interests. As we develop this discipline, we discover that some conversations resolve themselves without our intervention, while others reveal important truths through the other person's reaction to our silence. 2. Speaking with purpose. Every word we speak should have a clear purpose. Without purpose, our speech becomes not just ineffective, but potentially harmful to ourselves and others. The Stoics, particularly Marcus Aurelius, emphasized that all actions, including speech, should have justifiable reasons behind them. In our modern context, purposeless communication manifests in several ways: venting without seeking solutions, speaking to fill uncomfortable silences, talking to impress others, or simply blurting out unprocessed thoughts and emotions. These patterns of speech make us vulnerable to manipulation and diminish our impact. When we speak with purpose, 3 things happen. First, we become more persuasive because our communication has direction and clarity. Second, we waste less energy on unproductive exchanges. Third, we become more difficult to manipulate because we're consciously choosing when and why to engage rather than being provoked into response. Purposeful speech requires us to distinguish between several different communication objectives. Are we speaking to inform or educate? Are we speaking to understand through questions? Are we speaking to resolve a conflict? Are we speaking to strengthen a relationship? Are we speaking to establish boundaries? Each purpose demands different approaches, tones, and word choices. When we conflate these purposes or engage without a clear purpose, our communication becomes muddled and ineffective. Practice. Before entering any significant conversation, ask yourself, what is my purpose in speaking? Then, during the interaction, mentally check, is what I'm about to say aligned with that purpose? This habit alone can transform your communication effectiveness and protect you from being drawn into unproductive or manipulative exchanges. The Stoic principle of speaking with purpose doesn't mean every utterance must have profound significance. Small talk and casual conversation have their place in building rapport. Rather, this principle encourages consciousness about our speech, ensuring that our words serve us rather than undermine us. 3. Balanced communication. Stoic wisdom teaches that knowing when to speak and when to remain silent requires a delicate balance that few master. According to Epictetus, understanding the appropriate moment for either represents an essential aspect of wise living. This balance depends not just on what is said, but on timing, context, and the emotional state of all involved. In practical terms, this means developing sensitivity to conversational dynamics. Some moments call for assertive speech, when establishing boundaries, clarifying misunderstandings, or advocating for important principles. Other situations benefit from restraint, when emotions run high, when insufficient information is available, or when speaking would serve no constructive purpose. This balanced approach proves especially valuable when dealing with toxic individuals. Such people often attempt to provoke emotional responses through various tactics, creating artificial urgency. I need your answer right now. Using emotional manipulation. If you really cared, you would. Employing hostile questioning or accusations. Interrupting or speaking over others. The balanced communicator recognizes these tactics and refuses to be rushed into premature speech or baited into defensive reactions. Instead, they control the rhythm of conversation, speaking when strategic and withholding when prudent. Balance also extends to the proportion of speaking versus listening in our interactions. Many communication problems stem from an imbalance where one person dominates the exchange. Stoic practice encourages us to listen at least as much as we speak, creating space for genuine dialogue rather than competitive monologues. Practice. During conversations, particularly challenging ones, pause periodically to assess the energy of the interaction. Notice the emotional temperature, power dynamics, and whether the exchange remains productive. Based on this assessment, consciously choose whether to continue speaking, shift to listening, ask questions, or temporarily withdraw from the discussion. This practice of balanced communication doesn't come naturally to most people. Our tendency is either to withdraw completely from difficult conversations or to push through with increasing intensity. The Stoic middle path requires awareness, patience, and the humility to recognize that sometimes the wisest contribution to a conversation is temporary silence. 4. Speaking with integrity. The Stoics placed tremendous emphasis on alignment between inner beliefs and outward expression. This integrity in communication stands as perhaps the most powerful shield against manipulation by toxic individuals. When our words consistently match our thoughts and values, we become both more trustworthy to others and more impervious to psychological manipulation. This principle operates at several levels. At the most basic level, speaking with integrity means avoiding deliberate deception. While seemingly obvious, small, white lies and strategic omissions easily become habitual, eroding our character and credibility over time. More deeply, integrity requires us to express our authentic perspective, even when it might be unpopular or uncomfortable. This doesn't mean being needlessly provocative or insensitive, but rather having the courage to speak difficult truths when necessary. Perhaps most challenging, integrity demands consistency between what we advocate for others and how we ourselves behave. Hypocrisy, saying one thing while doing another, undermines our moral authority and makes us vulnerable to legitimate criticism. Speaking with integrity becomes particularly important when dealing with manipulative people who often test boundaries to see where we might compromise our values, use our past inconsistencies to justify inappropriate demands, attempt to shame us into compliance by pointing out perceived hypocrisies, try to make us question our own perceptions, gaslighting. When we consistently speak with integrity, we develop an internal compass that helps us recognize and resist these tactics. We become more comfortable standing our ground because we know our position reflects our genuine values. Practice. Establish a personal rule never to say anything you wouldn't be willing to stand behind if directly questioned. Before making statements, especially those involving commitments or personal boundaries, ask yourself, would I maintain this position even under pressure or criticism? This practice builds the habit of speaking with deliberate integrity rather than convenience or people-pleasing. The Stoic commitment to integrity doesn't demand absolute transparency in all situations. There are times when privacy or diplomacy takes precedence. What it does require is that our words reflect our authentic values and commitments rather than momentary convenience or social pressure. 5. The practice of concise speech. Brevity represents both an art and a strategic advantage in communication. The Stoic philosopher Seneca emphasized that excessive words often dilute rather than strengthen our message. In our modern context of information overload, the ability to communicate concisely has become even more valuable. Concise speech offers several advantages. First, it demonstrates respect for others' time and attention, increasingly scarce resources in our distracted world. When we communicate efficiently, we signal that we value the listener's cognitive resources. Second, concise communication increases the impact of our words. When we trim away redundancy and verbal clutter, our key points gain prominence and power. As Seneca noted, diluted language produces diluted impact. Third, and most relevant to dealing with toxic individuals, concise speech provides fewer opportunities for manipulation. The more we speak, the more material we provide that can be taken out of context, twisted, or used against us later. Brief, clear statements leave less room for misinterpretation, whether accidental or deliberate. This principle doesn't advocate for abrupt or incomplete communication. Rather, it encourages precision and economy of expression, saying exactly what needs to be said without unnecessary elaboration or repetition. Toxic individuals often employ several tactics that concise speech effectively counters. They may use verbose, circular arguments to confuse issues. They may interrupt repeatedly, hoping to frustrate you into saying something regrettable. They may attempt to exhaust you verbally until you concede points just to end the conversation. Responding with clear, concise statements maintains your position without providing unnecessary openings for further manipulation. Practice. Before important conversations, identify your core message in 1 or 2 sentences. During the interaction, periodically check whether additional details support this core message or merely dilute it. When you catch yourself over-explaining or digressing, gently redirect to your central point. Additionally, practice eliminating hedge words and qualifiers that undermine your authority. Sort of, kind of, maybe, I think, just, etc. While appropriate in some contexts, these verbal habits often reflect insecurity rather than thoughtfulness and can diminish your impact. The Stoic practice of concise speech doesn't mean becoming robotic or dismissive. Rather, it encourages thoughtful editing of our verbal expression to maximize clarity and impact while minimizing vulnerability to manipulation. 6. Reflective speech. The Stoics emphasize the importance of foresight in all actions, including communication. Before speaking, they advocated carefully considering the potential consequences of our words. This reflective approach to speech provides powerful protection against manipulation and prevents many interpersonal problems before they begin. Reflective speech involves several key practices. First, it requires us to anticipate how our words might be received given the specific audience, context, and relationship dynamics. Different people interpret the same words differently based on their experiences, sensitivities, and current emotional state. Second, reflective speech considers the long-term impact of our communication, not just the immediate reaction. Words spoken in moments of frustration can damage relationships for years. Conversely, carefully chosen words in difficult moments can build lasting trust and respect. Third, this approach encourages us to examine our own motives before speaking. Are we communicating to clarify, connect, or contribute? Or are we speaking from ego, insecurity, or a desire to control others? This reflective approach proves particularly valuable when dealing with toxic individuals who often provoke emotional reactions to undermine rational discussion, record or remember our words selectively to use against us later, attempt to rush us into unwise statements by creating artificial urgency, use our past statements to paint us as inconsistent or untrustworthy. By developing the habit of reflection before speech, we create a buffer zone that allows us to choose our words strategically rather than reactively. Practice. Before important conversations or when addressing sensitive topics, imagine your words being recorded, transcribed, and publicly attributed to you. Would you stand behind what you're about to say? Would future you be proud of or embarrassed by these words? This mental exercise helps develop the habit of speaking in alignment with your highest values rather than momentary impulses. The Stoic practice of reflective speech doesn't mean becoming paralyzed by overthinking every utterance. Rather, it encourages a habit of brief mental preview before significant communications, a practice that becomes more automatic and efficient with time. 7. Non-reactive communication. At the heart of Stoic communication philosophy lies the principle of non-reactivity, maintaining inner composure regardless of external provocations. This principle directly addresses one of the primary strategies toxic individuals employ, attempting to trigger emotional reactions that override rational thought. The Stoics emphasize that it is not external events or others' words that disturb us, but rather our judgments about them. When we internalize this wisdom, provocative statements lose much of their power over us. We gain the ability to respond thoughtfully rather than react impulsively. Non-reactive communication manifests in several ways. First, it involves creating space between stimulus and response. When faced with provocation, the non-reactive communicator pauses briefly to assess the situation rather than immediately firing back. Second, it requires emotional awareness, recognizing when we're becoming triggered and acknowledging those feelings without being controlled by them. This awareness allows us to make conscious choices about how to proceed. Third, non-reactive communication means maintaining consistent tone, pace, and demeanor even when others escalate. This steadiness often diffuses tension rather than amplifying it. This approach proves particularly effective against common toxic tactics. Deliberate provocation designed to make you lose composure, emotional escalation to pressure you into concessions, personal attacks meant to put you on the defensive, button pushing based on knowledge of your sensitivities. When we remain non-reactive, these tactics lose their effectiveness, often leaving manipulative individuals unsure how to proceed when their standard techniques fail. Practice. Develop a physical anchor for non-reactivity. A subtle movement like touching thumb to forefinger or taking a single deep breath that reminds you to pause before responding to provocative statements. During that pause, mentally step back from the interaction and ask, what would a composed, centered version of myself say in this moment? This brief intervention breaks the automatic stimulus-response pattern that manipulators rely on. The Stoic principle of non-reactive communication doesn't mean becoming emotionless or detached. Rather, it represents emotional intelligence at its highest level, feeling fully while choosing responses aligned with our values rather than our triggers. 8. Constructive speech. The Stoics viewed speech as a form of service, an opportunity to contribute to the greater good rather than merely express personal viewpoints. This perspective transforms communication from self-centered expression to other-centered contribution. When applied skillfully, constructive speech builds relationships, solves problems, and advances understanding. Constructive communication stands in direct opposition to the destructive patterns often employed by toxic individuals. Where they seek to criticize, constructive speech seeks to improve. Where they attempt to tear down, constructive speech aims to build up. This principle operates through several practices. First, constructive speech focuses on solutions rather than dwelling exclusively on problems. It asks, "What now?" and "What next?" rather than simply, "What's wrong?" and "Who's to blame?" Second, it employs inquiry over assertion when possible. Asking thoughtful questions often proves more effective than making definitive statements, particularly when differences of opinion exist. Questions invite engagement. Assertions often provoke resistance. Third, constructive speech addresses behaviors and situations rather than attacking character. This distinction allows for problem-solving without unnecessarily damaging relationships or creating defensiveness. This approach effectively counters toxic communication patterns like chronic complaining without offering solutions, criticism designed to undermine rather than improve, divisive speech that creates opposition rather than collaboration, demeaning communication that attacks worth rather than addressing actions. When we consistently speak constructively, we not only become less vulnerable to toxic dynamics, but also create an environment where such dynamics struggle to take root. Practice. Before offering criticism or pointing out problems, develop the habit of first identifying at least one possible improvement or solution. Additionally, practice transforming critical statements into curious questions. This approach won't work becomes, what challenges do you see with this approach, and how might we address them? This shift maintains honesty while inviting collaboration rather than defensiveness. The Stoic commitment to constructive speech doesn't require sugarcoating difficult truths or avoiding necessary confrontations. Rather, it encourages framing even challenging communications in ways that build rather than destroy, addressing problems while preserving dignity and relationship. 9. Empathetic communication. While sometimes misunderstood as detached or unemotional, Stoic philosophy actually emphasizes deep human connection through understanding others' perspectives. Seneca particularly emphasized the importance of judgment suspended in favor of understanding. This empathetic approach to communication creates both connection and protection. Empathetic communication involves actively attempting to understand others' experiences, motivations, and emotions before responding. This understanding doesn't necessarily mean agreement, but it does provide crucial context that informs how we engage. This principle operates through several practices. First, empathetic communication involves genuine curiosity about others' perspectives. We ask questions designed to deepen understanding rather than prove points or gather ammunition for counter-arguments. Second, it practices reflective listening, demonstrating that we've heard and understood by accurately summarizing others' views before responding to them. This simple practice dramatically improves the quality of difficult conversations. Third, empathetic communication acknowledges emotions, both others and our own, as valid data points in the interaction rather than inconvenient obstacles to rational discussion. Developing empathetic communication skills provides significant protection against common toxic tactics. It helps us distinguish between someone expressing genuine hurt versus using emotional manipulation. It allows us to recognize when apparent attacks actually stem from the other person's insecurities or past traumas. It provides insight into motivations that might otherwise remain hidden. Paradoxically, understanding toxic individuals' perspectives often gives us greater clarity and emotional distance rather than making us more vulnerable to manipulation. Practice. Before responding in challenging conversations, mentally put yourself in the other person's position. Ask yourself, what might they be feeling right now? What needs or fears might be driving this behavior? Then acknowledge that perspective. I can see how, from your viewpoint, this situation is frustrating, before presenting your own perspective. The Stoic practice of empathetic communication doesn't mean accepting mistreatment or abandoning boundaries. Rather, it provides deeper insight that allows us to respond more effectively to the real dynamics at play rather than merely reacting to surface behaviors. 10. Assertive communication with respect. The final Stoic communication principle combines clarity and directness with fundamental respect for human dignity, including the dignity of those who may not treat us respectfully. This balanced approach allows us to maintain boundaries and express truth without descending into hostility that ultimately undermines our own character and well-being. Assertive, respectful communication stands apart from both passive speech, which sacrifices our needs and boundaries, and aggressive speech, which disregards others' dignity and rights. It represents the middle path that allows us to honor ourselves while acting in accordance with Stoic virtue. This principle operates through several key practices. First, it employs I statements rather than accusatory you statements. I feel concerned when deadlines are missed carries different impact than you're always late with your work. Second, it separates observations from interpretations. The project was delivered 3 days after the agreed deadline states an observable fact, while you don't care about this team's success represents an interpretation that may or may not be accurate. Third, assertive, respectful communication clearly articulates boundaries and expectations without apology or aggression. It states what we need or what we will and won't accept, while leaving others their dignity and autonomy. This approach effectively counters many toxic communication tactics. It prevents gaslighting by clearly naming observable behaviors. It maintains boundaries without providing the emotional reaction manipulators often seek. It reduces the effectiveness of Darvo tactics, deny, attack, reverse victim and offender, by staying factual and centered. When we communicate assertively with respect, we maintain our integrity while reducing the leverage that difficult people might otherwise gain over us. Practice. When addressing problems or setting boundaries, use the 3-part formula. 1. Specific observation. I've noticed that. 2. Impact statement. The effect of this is. 3. Request or boundary. Going forward, I need, or what I'm asking is. This structure keeps communication clear and focused while avoiding accusations or personal attacks. The Stoic approach to assertive, respectful communication doesn't guarantee that others will respond in kind. What it does ensure is that we maintain our own character and dignity regardless of how others choose to behave. Perhaps the ultimate goal of Stoic practice. Your words as bridge or weapon. The ancient Stoics understood what modern psychology confirms. Our words create our reality. They shape our relationships, our opportunities, and ultimately, our character. When we master our communication following these principles, we build bridges of understanding, even in difficult circumstances. When we fail to do so, our words become weapons that often wound us as much as others. The 10 Stoic rules explored here offer more than philosophical ideals. They provide practical protection against manipulation, misunderstanding, and unnecessary conflict. They transform our interactions from potential battlegrounds into opportunities for genuine connection and mutual growth. Epictetus reminds us that we must care for what we say because we cannot control how others hear. Our responsibility lies in the clarity, intention, and integrity of our communication, not in managing others' responses to it. The mastery of communication represents mastery of self. When we speak with purpose, listen with presence, and respond with wisdom, we create an inner citadel that toxic individuals cannot penetrate. We maintain our peace regardless of external chaos. As you implement these principles, remember that perfection isn't the goal. Progress is. Each conversation becomes an opportunity to practice, learn, and refine your approach. Over time, these practices become not just strategies you employ, but integral aspects of your character. Which of these Stoic communication principles do you most need to apply in your life today? If this exploration has prompted reflection, please like, comment, and share with someone who might also benefit from these ancient yet timeless wisdom teachings. Subscribe to the channel and activate notifications for more transformative content that bridges philosophical wisdom with practical life application.